Legislative Council.
Representative Squirrel, representing Underhill and Jericho, and I'm in House Appropriations.
Senator Mark McDonald from Orange County, Chair of LCAR.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in Bristol, representing the Addison District. I serve on Senate Natural Resources and Energy and Finance.
I'm Representative Seth Bongartz. I represent Arlington, Manchester, Sunderland, and Sandgate in the legislature, and I serve on the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee.
Thank you all. And if there are witnesses that are now listening to us live and could not hear us as we spoke, this is the time to raise your hand and tell us you couldn't hear us. Okay, first item on the agenda to review and approve the minutes of October 21st, 2021. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
It's been Representative Odie has moved that we approve the minutes of October 21st, 2021. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay, and the minutes have been approved. First item on the agenda today is the Vermont Public Utility Commission's PUC emergency rules. We have listed as witness Steph Hoffman, Deputy Counsel of Vermont Public Utility Commission, and Bishop, Operations Director of the Vermont Public Utility Commission. And do we have any other people, witnesses that are standing by other than these?
Council is Alan.
Hoffman.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Today I'm presenting the Public Utility Commission's revised Emergency Rule 2.500. This amends various filing and procedural requirements and provides alternative procedures to reduce and eliminate COVID-19 risk for Commission staff and members of the public. This is the same emergency procedures rule approved by LCAR in April 2020, October 2020, and April 2021, with two minor substantive changes that are reflected in the red line that was submitted with all of the other materials to the committee. The first is in the purpose and scope paragraph to acknowledge the governor has lifted the state of emergency, but that COVID repercussions persist. And the second is a change to section 2.503 to make electronic filing in this particular case permissive rather than required, acknowledging that our offices will reopen to the public during the pendency of the rule. Like the other rules, these were posted to our website homepage, and we opened a rulemaking case in our e-filing system called ePUC, and we have not received any comments on this revised emergency rule. So I will now leave it open to any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? So to recap, this is a change of date to extend the practices of the PUC that have been in place since the beginning of COVID, with two specific acknowledgements. One that the governor has lifted the state of emergency, and the second one escaped. But aside from those two particular changes, this is the same rule that would have been in effect for the last, since the last provisions were put in place for PUC participation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Mr. Chair, I'll move.
Representative Bongartz has moved that the rule be approved. And are there any further questions before we tackle that?
I would say we hold off on the motion because one of our members had to leave the room. We don't have a majority. And she'll be back shortly.
Thank you. Without you, I would be in trouble time after time. We're short of the number of people to vote. There's no reluctance in approving the rule at this time. And committee's permission, we will take that up when we're back to having a quorum. Thank you very much. And we will take up next the Department of Forest and Parks and Recreation Vermont Joint Quarantine Rule on a malady, the first word of which I cannot pronounce, and the second ends with Canker. We have several witnesses listed. David Hubner, Megan Purby, Judy Roskowski, and Gary Giguere. Gary Giguere. I probably got a couple of those, not as well as I should have. Do we have any other witnesses other than those listed?
Counsel Michael O'Grady is also.
And our counsel, Mike O'Grady, may be added, is on the list. Who's going to lead off for the commissioner for the Forest and Parks?
Senator, my name is David Huber. I will be the primary witness for Agency of Agriculture. I'm speaking on behalf of both the agencies, both Forest Parks and Rec and Agency of Agriculture. Both recommend that this rule be repealed. The word that you tried at the very beginning, Senator, was Scleroderis. I have not been able to spell it correctly twice. This is a joint quarantine, specifically joint quarantine number 1. It was established in 1987 in order to control the spread of Scleroderis canker, which is a disease which can cause mortality in species of pine trees. This specific filing is to repeal the Scleroderis canker joint quarantine rule. We believe that the repeal is necessary because there have been a substantial lack of evidentiary findings. There has been a substantial lack, absolutely zero, complaints regarding this disease in Vermont, and phytosanitary certificates have not been requested by the regulated community. We feel that the repeal is necessary because online records have demonstrated that this disease has not been reported in the state going back to at least 2011. That date is specific to the last online record that we have, and that record said that this was not found in the state. Since state personnel have not detected this disease, this quarantine, we feel, cannot be justified because continuing to have this on the books may cause unnecessary worry for the regulated community and residents of the state. Additionally, just as a backup, nursery rules already regulate the primary means of dispersal for this canker, which is moving the fungus on live trees. This rule is not needed to export pine products from Vermont. And additionally, the canker itself cannot sustain itself on non-living trees. And I open up to questions.
Are there any questions of the witness? So, Senator Bray.
No, if you had a question, I will wait. Thank you.
So this appears to be a rule that's been in place for a couple of decades, and the threat that the rule was designed to tackle has not materialized, and you are asking that the rule be repealed. Is that correct? Is that
Yes, yes, Senator.
Senator Bray?
I move that we approve Rule 21 P26, but pending the return of our quorum, our last committee member who stepped out briefly.
So we have a motion that will be pending our return of our quorum. Does anybody have any other questions or for the witness, or do we have any other witnesses on this particular rule that wish to speak to it at this time? No other witnesses, no other questions, and we are now have a quorum. And Senator Bray, would you make the motion again?
Sure. I would move that the LCAR approve Rule 21 P26.
Question is, shall the rule be approved as presented? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Thank you very much. This brings us to.
Should we go back, Mr. Something you're gonna do? Okay.
We are now going to go back to the first rule for which we had a motion and lacked a quorum. to approve the Public Utility Commission's Rule 21E16. Everybody's ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved, which brings us to, well, I can pronounce, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, rule number 21P25, dealing with the hemlock woolly algae, well, I thought I could pronounce it, algae quarantine. And for the first witness on the list is Mr. Huber again, and we have several others listed, but Mr. Huber.
Thank you, Senator and members of LCAR. Again, this is also another rule where I've probably not been able to spell woolly correctly 2 times in a row. Both of these rules, this and Scleroderis Canker, both contain confusing words. For this rule here, there has been a change in what was originally filed with LCAR. The change has been made available to Legislative Council, and I believe that they have also given the changes out to members of the committee. I can explain those in detail. All of those were for clarity purposes. The hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive sap-sucking insect that causes mortality in hemlock trees across the eastern seaboard, along with other parts of the United States through its feeding. This amendment to the existing rule is necessary to protect Vermont's hemlock resource, as hemlock woolly adelgid, HWA, just for abbreviating purposes, was first reported in Vermont in 2007, and unfortunately is now established well within the state. The existing rule was an external quarantine and only prohibited the entry of regulated articles into Vermont. This created confusion about the movement of hemlock from infested counties within Vermont. So this amendment is necessary because the existing rule regulates logs, lumber, and chips, which over the past 30 years in Vermont have not been known to spread hemlock woolly adelgid. Rather, state personnel have determined that the primary means of dispersal, which is the pathway of highest risk concerning this specific pest, is through nursery stock. And again, as explained in the testimony for the last rule, Agency of Agriculture already has a very robust nursery inspection program and is made well aware of HWA. I open it up to LCAR for comments, as well as any questions about the modifications to the final proposed rule, which were submitted to Legislative Council.
Okay, thanks. Just a point of clarification, I guess, as I'm reading the rule. Forest Parks and Recreation had oversight with this issue, maybe in concert with the Ag Department, and we're dropping their oversight because we're basically saying that logs, lumber, and chips have not known to be to spread hemlock woolly adelgid. Is that 100%, or is that just a low probability? I guess I understand the pest is pest that eats branches, if you will. It's not on the trunk of a tree necessarily. But if I'm chipping a tree, would I then still have branches as part of the chips and things like that? So I'm looking for some clarification on that point.
Of course, Representative. When the tree has died, the insect can no longer feed on any part of that tree. And that's because the sap is going to dry up.
What if I'm cutting a live tree?
If you are cutting down a live tree, then I believe, and I can certainly allow my counterparts over at FPR to speak on this as well, but I believe that that would not be a primary means of dispersal. Again, a living tree would be the primary means of dispersal. Once cut, it would be no longer living.
follow up on Representative Squirrel's question. My understanding is that Vermont imports the leftover parts of softwood trees that have been harvested for lumber. And that the parts that are not sold for lumber are imported into Vermont to be burned in places like the Reigate plant. Is that not correct?
I would have to defer to my counterpart again over FPR for that.
To whom are you deferring?
Both Josh Hallman and Megan Purvey are on the phone call as well.
Okay. Waiting for one of them. You.
Perhaps Megan has better clarity on the importation of what particular hemlock materials come into the state. But to first answer, perhaps going back to the question about live material and chipping, the chipping of that material would in effect disrupt the feeding of the hemlock woolly adelgid enough that it would not be a viable means of spread for the insect. That process would not allow that insect to emerge and then feed on living trees in that vicinity. I will defer to Megan perhaps on the importation question of pieces of hemlock that are not sold for lumber.
Thank you, Josh. It's my understanding that the primary importation of hemlock materials is for nursery materials, and that this rule addresses that and requires treatment before they would come into the state. So that would address that issue. And then if there are logs that are already pre-cut, then you've removed that area of the tree that would feed the insect.
So your testimony is that this rule deals with the current rules having to do with the nursery and the roles of the nurseries in the spread of the woolly creature here, and does not change the current practices dealing with importation of hardwood, softwood chips. Is that leaves that section of rule and statute unchanged? That's a question.
Senator, if I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, the nursery program that's housed under the Agency of Agriculture would be still regulating hemlocks that are coming into the state, and as well as hemlocks that are already within the state and housed under quarantine and non-quarantined areas through the nursery program itself.
And any rules that apply to commerce among these trees other than nurseries has been unchanged. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that those are all unchanged. And the only thing that is changed is that Forest Parks and Rec would no longer be required to have any regulatory authority over anything that is nursery, because that's already handled by the Agency of Agriculture.
Thank you. Senator Bray.
Good morning, Mr. Huber. I had a question about the rule. So the filing says that a hearing was not held. And when I look at the ICAR review of the presentation of the rule, it says that public input should include outreach to landowners, nurseries, and greenhouses, and scheduling a hearing. So I'm trying to sort that out as to why there was no public hearing.
Sure, and good morning to you, Senator, as well. You are correct, there was no public hearing for this rule. what the agencies did do was conduct site visits over at nurseries within the state, received comments while on site, oral testimony from the nursery owners and workers, as well as informed them of the potential rule changes on site. This was done through the nursery program, and this rule itself was, for the most part, only known to nurseries. They want to be able to engage in commerce with hemlock trees, and by the changing of the rule to allow for increased commerce from out of state as well as within quarantine areas of the state will greatly benefit both homeowners as well as the nursery industry itself. As for the why the agencies did not conduct public hearings, for the agencies, it didn't seem as if the public, it might have been potentially burdensome on the public to have a public hearing, because not many people really know about this to begin with. Only those who are engaged in hemlock. Anyone who would say that they have a disease or something that may be affecting their hemlock trees would contact the Agency of Agriculture regardless, and we would go out for a nursery inspection and verify the type of pest or disease that was injurious to that tree.
Okay. Do you have a sense of, in the universe of nurseries in Vermont, how many you visited and or had conversations with directly or received comments from?
Sure. Over this past summer alone, I believe that our nursery program conducted well over 100 site visits to nurseries, and spoke with all of the nurseries on those site visits.
Thank you. So I think I would just comment in terms of, the concern is that a public hearing will burden the public. Just a little surprised, because I figured it's an opportunity for the public, not a burden for them. Thank you.
Any further questions for the witness? Any others who wish to speak to this issue that are on screen and not present? If not, what committee, what's your pleasure? Right.
I move that LCAR approve Rule 21P25.
Do you want to do it with their proposed modifications?
Yes, thank you for that, with the modifications as received by the committee from the agency.
Senator Bray moved at the.
Senator, I have one more addition. It came to light that there is a typo, and we didn't know this until just the other day. Under definition 2.2, the order Hemiptera is actually Hemiptera. We got our vowels wrong. In the summer of cicadas, we put down the wrong type of sap-sucking insect. I would request that when you do approve this, if that is your desire, please do so with the vowel changes, and please let me know whatever you need to make that happen.
May I ask counsel, can we make this as a Scrivener's error?
So under your rules, unless you indicate otherwise, they can make modifications of a technical or typographic nature. We include that in the approval memo that Charlene sends. I think that this is probably a technical error that they can correct without LCAR doing this.
Thank you.
Senator Bray has moved that the rule be approved with the amendments set forth and presented to the committee October 28th, and correction of the Scrivener's error is within his motion. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Okay. And the rule has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which brings us to Department of Taxes. 21, taxes and allocation and apportionment of the Vermont net income by corporations. Who is, we will be listening to Will Baker, Director of Legal Unit, Department of Taxes. And anyone else, Charlene?
Council Abby Shepherd.
And the Deputy Counsel also?
Abby Shepherd.
Oh, Abby Shepherd, yep, okay. So, Tax Department, it's, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Senator McDonald and members of the committee. Today we present amendments to the department's allocation and apportionment regulation. This regulation was last amended in 1998. It's if you read the rule, it probably appears quite complicated, and you may have fallen asleep reading it. But let me just lay the groundwork a little bit, which I think will help everyone understand this rule, even if you're not a corporate income tax expert. This is of utmost importance for state corporate income tax is apportionment, particularly for large businesses that operate across the country or at least in more than one state. In other words, we know how much net income they have. We can get that from their federal income tax filing. But the key for states is how much of that income is Vermont income versus New York or New Hampshire and so forth. These large business, you think of any large manufacturer, national or international manufacturer or retailer, service provider, they operate in all the states. And so the key, of course, is to figure out how much of that income is properly taxed in Vermont versus in the other states. And that's what this regulation is all about. In 2019, new legislation in Vermont changed the method in which we source income for some categories of income, services, income from intangible property. To give you a very basic example of what we're talking about here, if I am a firm in Vermont and I do business consulting in Montpelier, Vermont, and I pay corporate income tax, I may have clients all over. One of my clients might be in Albany, New York. I'm sitting in Montpelier, Vermont, performing these services, and my client is in Albany, New York. That whether or not this is an item of Vermont income or New York income is the change that was made legislatively in 2019. Prior to 2020, that income would have been considered Vermont income because the statute required that we look at where the taxpayer is located and where they're performing these services. Where is the most cost going in to the performance of that service? With that recent legislation, we changed to what's called market-based sourcing for services, which means that instead of looking at where the person is when they're working on the service, we look at the market for that service. And the market for my service is in Albany, New York, where my client is. So under the new law, that income would be sourced to New York. That would not be Vermont income. So that's a simple example to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. Now, we know that business models are complicated and there's all kinds of services and selling and licensing intangibles. And so that is what this regulation is all about. the legislature adopted the multi-state tax commission's model legislation for market-based sourcing. The multi-state tax commission is a national organization that supports tax administration for states. They pursue uniform law initiatives and those sorts of things. So they drafted this model legislation for market-based sourcing that several states have. And that's what Vermont adopted in 2019. The tax department has proposed these regulations to adopt the multi-state tax commission's uniform provisions as far as these regulations with respect to sourcing under market-based sourcing. So by and large, what we have here is the multi-state tax commission's draft and uniform regulation for market-based sourcing. Also, because we had not amended this regulation since 1998, there are a few other things, particularly in the definitions section, that better define what is apportionable income, including when assets are used in a business and then sold, and how that income is apportioned. And again, that is taken, those definitions are from the multi-state tax commission model definitions. So this is a uniform regulation that we've proposed to more or less match how other states approach market-based sourcing, which is required under this new law. And so it divides all kinds of types of income into various sections, and that provides specific rules for each of them. And as you can see, a lot of examples for each of them, categories like tangible property, services, rents of tangible property, licenses, leases of intangible property, and then services are divided into all kinds of categories, personal services, electronically delivered services, and so forth. So there's several categories, and it really gets in the weeds for a lot of it. But a lot of the volume of the text that you see here are examples that have been drafted by the Multi-State Tax Commission to try to illustrate these categories and to help taxpayers, corporate taxpayers, find the section that best meets their business model and the types of services and intangibles from which they earn income, and to help them interpret the regulation and to find the correct section. I could go on, but that is a general summary of this regulation. And I'm happy to take questions or go into a little bit more detail if you'd like.
Just would our committee members have any questions for the witness? Do we have any further on this topic, or anyone else lined up to speak on this rule? I hesitate to ask if each of us understand the breadth and depth of this, but if I were to ask that question, I'd have to start with myself, and I don't want to do that.
We spent a lot of time on a bill that we passed to change apportionment of taxes. It's in the Senate now, and hoping that it passes. But this is going to be very helpful clarification for Vermont businesses and for the tax department. So I think it's great. I would make a motion if you want me to. Okay, I move to approve this rule with the Department of Taxes. Additional proposed modifications as detailed in the correspondence from Will Baker dated November 1st, 2021.
Representative Odie has moved that we pass the rule as set forth. We're at a public hearing and we have, this is from around the state,
Oh, I'm sorry.
who may be, I'm making a comment
Okay.
on the bill. Who, when listening to the explanation, it's pretty hard to nail down. We have other rules where we have organizations that set the rules. For example, there's a national electricity code for how you build and put electric system in homes. Vermont, when you sell new cars in Vermont, you meet California standards, and those standards change periodically, and our rules accommodate those changes and update. Most people understand the electricity and the automobile thing, but the tax discussion is very difficult to get a handle on. But there's a 50-state agreement, there has to be some entity that makes the technical changes as work products change and business practices change over a period of years. And I believe that the rule before us attempts to take those natural and developing changes into account as we continue to participate in a tax system based on the taxation of revenues where the revenues are earned, state by state by state. This is an attempt to take a complicated thing and make it more understandable by the public. And that's one of the things that this committee often has to wrestle with in dealing with, which is why we have representatives of so many different committees that serve on LCAR. So that's my comment on the bill. And if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to add, this is the time to do it, or we'll call for a vote. Hearing no further questions and no discussion. Representative Odie has moved that the rule be approved as presented to us. There are no additions or corrections or typos that.
She made the approval.
Okay.
Or made-
Yeah, they were included within the motion. And so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay, and the rule has been approved. Thank you very much. And the Finance Committee looks forward to looking at the further changes proposed in statute when they get over to the Senate for discussion. Which brings us to, thank you very much to the witness.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My understanding is that the Department of Financial Regulation Healthcare Stop Loss Insurance rule has been withdrawn. And we are about to be presented with a request to extend the deadline. Is that correct? And you are?
I am Sebastian Ringer. May I step forward?
So this is made on short notice, so thank you for coming in this morning, and introduce yourself.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Sebastian Arguengo, and I am testifying for the Department of Financial Regulation in relation to the healthcare stop loss rule, which we have requested a revision to. Earlier this week, the department reached an agreement with the payer stakeholders to resolve the objections they had to the rule and do so in a way that was consistent with the regulatory objective that the department was trying to achieve with this revision. So even though the particular language of that agreement has not been finalized, I wanted to share with you what the objection was, the outline of the agreement, and the next steps going forward. So if the committee would be so kind as to indulge me, I can get underway with that.
So you will be presenting that you're going to plan to seek an extension or
That's right.
allow us to consider this.
That's right.
At a later date, but you would like to use this time to familiarize us with the
Yes.
primary issue
Yes.
so that we are better prepared when we take it up again at a later date.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to refer everyone to page 46 of the packet. It's 105 pages long, but it's the page that has this illustration on it that illustrates how stop loss insurance works. So, which I'm just going to explain because you're not the committees of jurisdiction, and it's helpful to have this background knowledge to understand what the objection was and how the agreement will satisfy the interests of all parties. So it's about halfway through the packet on page 46. If you have a numbered copy.
We ordered it a bit, so it's in order in these two. It's page 2 of your letter section.
Yeah.
It'll be the first, it's like 7 pages in. It'll be the first page at the top.
Sometimes we get catalogs that have 4 different sections, each of which begins page numbering.
It's good to know that this
Proceed.
rule is on the lighter side. So when an employer chooses to self-fund their own health insurance, they can contract with an insurance company to limit their exposure on their employer health plan, and that's called stop loss. And the way stop loss works is that if you see the illustration on page 2 of our letter, there are points, which we call attachment points, where the insurance kicks in. So in this example here, the insurance either kicks in at $100,000 of loss per claimant, or some amount in the aggregate for the entire plan. So it works sort of exactly like your car insurance works, where like once you've paid your deductible, that's anything over that amount. That's where the insurance kicks in. And one of the reasons that we have a stop loss regulation is to ensure that employers who choose to self-fund their own insurance are truly self-funded, and that these stop loss insurance policies don't function as high deductible health plans where the insurer has assumed 60, 70% of the claims risk. So with that said, I wanted to turn to the changes that the department proposed. And I am not sure where that is in the packet as Charlene ordered it for you, but I'll just refer to the red line version of the revision.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Senator Berry.
Thank you. So before we go on to the next bit, can you just explain a little further what you meant by wanting to ensure that, it sounded, I think you were saying, you don't want too large a percentage of total exposure to be covered through stop loss.
That's correct.
So that it's more like genuine insurance with unusual losses covered. Can you say what that dynamic is, why, how you want to set that line, and what you're trying to do by making sure that the self-insured party is actually insuring a sizable portion of risk?
Sure. So the reason that we want to ensure that the self-insured party is actually insuring a sizable portion of the risk is that, unlike fully insured health plans, self-insured plans can have benefit configurations that would not be allowable under state law. Self-insured health plans are generally regulated by the federal government under ERISA, so they don't have to include many of the benefit mandates that we require for fully insured health plans in Vermont. And the concern that the department has is that if stop loss functions as a high deductible health plan for that kind of coverage, that it will undercut the exchange.
Thank you.
So the department engaged a contract actuary, Oliver Wyman, to look at the self-insured market and study raising the attachment points to basically adjust for medical inflation. But when Oliver Wyman looked at the attachment points, what we found was that for very small employers, what could happen is that depending on how rich the benefits were, even at the attachment points that accounted for medical inflation, those employers would still cede upwards of 60% of the risk of loss to the stop loss insurer. So what we proposed was a higher attachment point for very small employers. And for the purposes of this rule, we define that as small employers with 25 or fewer employees. And those higher attachment points were, again, intended to ensure that those employers were truly self-funding their employee healthcare plan, as opposed to offloading the majority of the risk to the health insurer. So when we proposed this rule to stakeholders, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and the other main player in this market, which is small employers, Cigna, objected, saying that when you raise the attachment points for very small employers, if the group is relatively more healthy than the average population, then they will never hit those higher attachment points, and it thus not make sense to write stop loss coverage for those groups. So in response, and this is what's outlined in our comment response letter, Blue Cross Shield of Vermont proposed attachment point that would allow their very small employers with the employees and good claims experience to continue to self-insure. We had Oliver Wyman look at the attachment points proposed by Ross, and Oliver Wyman determined that if the department were to enact a rule with those attachment points, that what would in essence happen would be that the risk ceded by the employer would be even less than it is under our current rule, which would be contrary to the objective of what the department is trying to do here. Which brings us to earlier this week when Blue Cross again reached out and proposed discussing the department's objections and clarifying what they had meant. And Blue Cross advised the department that it wasn't their intention to propose an attachment point that would broaden the risk ceded for employers and open the floodgates to very, very low cost stop loss plans in which employers ceded the majority of their claims risk. Instead, they advised that what they really wanted was to ensure that the small employers that already had stop loss coverage would be able to keep that coverage. And what they proposed was that because the vast majority of very small employers that insure with stop loss coverage provided by Blue Cross have gold medal level plans or higher. And in this context, gold, silver, those refer to how rich the benefits are.
When you say rich, you mean comprehensive?
Excuse me?
When you say rich,
Yes,
you mean how much they cover as opposed to how
That's
little they
correct.
cover? It's
yes, that's correct. So a gold plan covers more than a
more
silver.
comprehensive.
Yes. And when we reviewed that proposal with our actuaries, we found that it aligned with their previous work in that, in general, the more comprehensive a plan is, the more risk the employer retains. So Blue Cross proposed allowing small employers with at least one gold or higher level plan to self-insure using the attachment point that would otherwise be applicable to small employers, as long as they certified to the department that the employer did in fact offer comprehensive benefits that would ensure that they were retaining an adequate amount of risk. So because that aligns with what the department is trying to do insofar as making sure that stop loss coverage doesn't amount to a high deductible health plan for insurance. We agreed that we could make a modification to the rule as proposed to add that exception. So the plan going forward.
Senator Bray.
Just want to make sure I'm still following.
Yeah.
here. So the exception would hinge on whether or not that self-insured plan included gold level coverage. But did you say for just a single individual within the plan, or that all members covered would have gold level plans?
Even a single individual would be enough. Most of the groups in question here have 15 or fewer employees. So even one person is enough to move the risk seated for the entire plan.
So there could be, for instance, an owner who would have a gold level plan, and 14 employees who might have lesser coverage. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we requested data from Blue Cross on the employers that would be affected by this exemption, and they provided that data yesterday. And what it showed was that there is only one employer right now that offers coverage that is at a level below gold in addition to a gold level plan. And in the aggregate, that employer is ceding roughly 50% of the risk to the stop loss insurer, which is pretty close to what we want to see. So that was our reasoning for allowing the small employer, to take advantage of a lower attachment point, even if there was only a single member enrolled in the benefit plan.
If I may, so the proposal you'll be coming back with, compared to your original attachment point numbers, are we going to see a lower number or a less high number than you originally proposed?
So
And
as
how
far
will that
as
compare to the Blue Cross Shield suggestion?
So as far as the attachment points go, what we've contemplated is that the very small players will have the same attachment point as other small players. So in section 4, those small employers will have the annual attachment point for claims incurred per individual of $33,200, and the aggregate attachment point, which is the greater of 120% of expected claims, or $30,200.
And that compares to current law, higher or lower?
It is, those numbers are both higher than they would be under current law.
For the public listening in, this is about as complicated as shared corporate taxes. And when you self-insure and then you bring up Blue Cross, is that because Blue Cross, most people will say, oh, Blue Cross, an insurance company.
Yes.
In the cases that you were discussing, when you bring up Blue Cross being used for self-insurers, is Blue Cross being hired to take the risk, or is Blue Cross being hired to do the mechanics and the mathematics and the actuarials on behalf of the self-insurer?
So that is a
Blue Cross
question,
is not taking the risk.
Yeah, so when we're talking about self-insurance, Blue Cross is taking the risk of providing stop loss coverage. But what they are also doing, and this is why you typically see health insurers that offer healthcare stop loss, is that they're acting as a third-party administrator of the employee's the employer's health plan, so that if you are an employee of a self-insured employer, for instance, the state of Vermont has a self-insured health plan that's administered by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. you will have a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont insurance card. It will have your employer's logo in the corner, and you'll be able to go to any provider that is in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Blue Cross Blue Shield will administer claims, but the key difference for a self-insured employer is that it's the employer that pays for the claim instead of Blue Cross. You could do it differently.
I was only, no, I was only, people are listening and they're asking, my goodness, if you're self-insured, why is Blue Cross doing it? Well, they're doing it as hired guns, not as a Blue Cross investment for their own
That's right.
earnings. They're doing it as similar to what we learned last week, that our unemployment insurance technical computer work is now being outsourced to a state that already has a system that works.
Yes.
We're on the hook for our unemployment. They simply are administering it on our
Yes.
behalf. That's what we're talking about with self-insurance.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Senator Bray.
One last question. So you addressed this in your letter, and I'm wondering if you can just explain a little. It's on the final page of your letter, and talked about the concern that stop-loss insurance opens the door to self-insured employees to discriminate against employees and medical conditions, et cetera. And can you, the state has had community underwriting for years and defined a broader and broader set of benefits that are part of that coverage. Can you enumerate what sorts of coverage will be required under Vermont law compared to what would be allowed through one of the self-insured plans? What sort of benefits might not be included?
Sure. To think of a really simple example, Vermont law requires chiropractic coverage as a mandated insurance benefit for fully insured plans. If you had a self-insured plan, you could offer coverage that did not include that chiropractic benefit, and that's completely allowable.
How about women's reproductive health?
That would be covered because it's a benefit that's required under the Affordable Care Act. So any benefits that are required under the ACA or other federal law, those are generally benefits that self-insured plans have to offer, but any state mandated benefits, self-insured plans do not have to offer.
And last thing, any other notable exceptions beyond chiropractic care that might not be included?
I can prepare a list for the committee of insurance mandates that are in Vermont law that are not mirrored in federal law and applicable to self-insured plans under ERISA. I think it would be a long list, and I don't want to go off the cuff.
That would be helpful.
I will do that. That I think the department would ask the committee to postpone consideration of this rule and grant an extension of the review period to consider the new language.
So,
For how long?
excuse me?
An extension just until our next meeting, or?
What's the date that you are requesting?
Either the November 18th meeting or the meeting after that, whatever is more convenient for the committee.
We'll ask our counsel.
To provide some clarity here, because there are a couple of deadlines that float around out there. Under statute, the agency, so here DFR has 8 months to adopt a rule once it starts the process. Under statute, LCAR, you have 45 days to act on the rule after it's been filed with LCAR, or the agency can go and do things like adopt the rule even though you haven't weighed in on it yet. DFR's 8-month window expires on December 6th. Your 45-day review period expires on November 13th, which is before your next meeting. So DFR is requesting postponement and agreeing to LCAR having an extension on its 45-day review period. LCAR could get up until December 6th, and it would still be okay with DFR's 8-month window. If LCAR is not going to act by December 6th, then you're probably going to be hearing from DFR saying, hey, we need an extension on our 8-month window to adopt the rule. So it's confusing that there are two different things. They're requesting postponement and saying, and we'll agree to your request, which you haven't really made yet on an extension, but why would you agree to postpone if they're not going to agree to your extension? So there's a bunch of things going on.
So what do you recommend, counsel?
Oh, I recommend that you do what Sebastian included in his letter, which you get an extension for LCAR to act until December 6th, have those 2 days align, and then you all choose, maybe you look at your agenda for November 18th, schedule it for November 18th if you think you can fit it. I think Sherman probably can weigh in on what's scheduled. If you aren't able to do it on November 18th, you can then always bump one down. So I think if you can fit it on November 18th, do it on November 18th.
So you're suggesting we grant
Postponement until November 18th and accept the extension through December 6th.
Representative Bogarts, you making a motion?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
Could you, counsel, repeat the motion?
Sure.
Senator Bogarts.
So
Representative Bogarts, me?
What Representative Bogarts is moving is that you postpone action on this rule until November 18th and accept DFR's extension through December 6th for LCAR to review.
Committee, you've heard the motion by Senator Bogarts. Representative Bogarts to enforce the extension, which would solve the dilemma of the agency and get us to review it in a timely manner. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. And the motion has been granted, and we have a schedule to. John, thank you for the briefing.
Yes, thank you.
What's the opposite of a rich plan, a comprehensive plan? What's the other end of the spectrum in vocabulary of insurance?
I think you would say less rich in conversation. There are plans that are less rich and plans that are more rich.
I've heard of
There are other adjectives you could use, but I'm trying to be polite.
Well, thank you for that bold, those bold definitions.
Thank you.
Which, and we look forward to hearing presentations for next time. Thank you.
Yes.
Then where we're supposed to here. Number 5, Office of Professional Regulation, Administrative Rules for the Assessing of Professional Credentials Obtained outside the United States. That's 21 P14. Lauren Lehman, Staff Attorney, Secretary of State's Office, is here to testify. And
Yes.
do we have any other witnesses who may?
Council is present.
And counsel for Secretary of State's Office.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator. I'm here today to present these rules with a lengthy name, but a very simple purpose, which is we receive applications for professional licensure from individuals who pursued their education or experiential or examination outside of the United States in another country. OPR is not equipped to evaluate those credentials, particularly extensive education transcripts, and to determine whether those educational programs in a foreign country meet the educational requirements of institutions in the United States. There are, however, credential evaluation services that are organizations, corporations designed specifically to do this assessment. In 2019, the legislature passed a bill, which is it's now 3 VSA 137, authorizing OPR to establish rules that would create a process for accepting reports from credential evaluation services with the intent of creating a pathway to professional licensure for new Americans or individuals who received their professional qualifications outside of the country. And that is what these rules do. It's a fairly straightforward process. The credentialing evaluation services are any credentialing evaluation service that is a member of one of two national standards organizations can be used by applicants, which provides a wide breadth of options and a wide breadth of professions included. So, some credentialing evaluation services are specific to certain professions, and OPR wanted to make sure that we didn't limit the credentialing evaluation services available to applicants. So we turned to these national organizations that set standards for membership, and we rely on those organizations. So and to provide a broad base of options for applicants. From there, the applicant is required to obtain a report at their own expense from one of the credentialing evaluation services and submit it to OPR in lieu of whatever qualification they obtained outside of the United States. So if they obtain their education outside of the United States, they would submit a report from a CES, a credentialing evaluation service, in lieu of a transcript and from that institution. OPR would still require documentation of receipt of the degree, but we would not look at the transcript itself. This report would stay in its stead, and the board or the OPR, the board would look to the evaluation report to state whether the degree is equivalent to Vermont standards qualifications for licensure or is not equivalent. The professional exam for a profession, even if it's been taken outside of the country, is still required per these rules in the United States. And the reason we did that was just to have that check on competency and public safety. There is a waiver opportunity, however, included in the rules. So if somebody can demonstrate they've recently taken and passed an equivalent exam and there's other documentation, there's an opportunity to waive that, the requirement. And then, so a determination of non-equivalence is treated like a preliminary denial, as we would with anybody from the United States or elsewhere who did not meet the educational qualifications for licensure. We have a robust due process for that pre-denial and preliminary denial, or denial is what we call it. And then that person can seek review of the denial and ultimately appeal it if the license is denied. That is the same process that would be applied in this situation if there's a determination by a credentialing evaluation service that the education received overseas is not equivalent to the Vermont qualification requirements. And if there's a determination of partial equivalence, this person qualifies but probably needs this one course, the rules authorize the director or the board to require the completion of some unfulfilled education or qualification so that person can get to licensure. That is the summary. It's a pretty short rule, only about 4 pages, but hopefully very helpful to folks out there trying to get a professional license and get into the workforce.
Any questions for the witness?
Senator, I should mention that this rule only applies where a profession doesn't already have a pathway to licensure for in their rules or in their statutes. We do have a document that we've developed. I think there's probably about 10 professions that have another pathway to licensure that this rule doesn't apply to, but it applies to about 4. It's not in the packet, but I can have it submitted. And so, but it applies to a significant number of our professions that OPR regulates.
It's a strange, there's an interesting theme running through several of our rules today, which is in this particular one, we are outsourcing certification, are we not?
We've never been the certifier. So OPR regularly relies on accreditors in the United States of education. It's very rare, I think only in 2 professions where a professional board or OPR will look at the coursework specifically for a degree. Instead, we rely on third-party accreditors similar to medical education, where there are, institutions in the country that accredit that education, develop the educational program and curriculum for that degree in that profession. And OPR relies on that. The concern with international degrees is they obviously don't have a US accreditation. So OPR can't rely on the US accreditation. And that has blocked a lot of individuals from being able to get licensed, even if they have the equivalent degree, it just doesn't have a US accreditation associated with it. So a bit of outsourcing, but it's always been an outsource because OPR just doesn't have the capability to look at educational programs for 52 professions.
So there's sort of, yes, we're outsourcing to someone outside the state of Vermont on our behalf to determine that people are qualified to provide the professional services rather than doing it ourselves.
Yes, there's a third-party accreditor associated, yes.
Are there established organizations that have been selected or qualify for being doing these accreditations?
Yes, so there's organizations that have standards for membership, and these credential evaluation services have to meet those standards for membership. In the larger organizations, there's 2 of them. The National Association of Credential Evaluation Services and the Association of International Credential Evaluators Incorporated. And if a CES, a service, is able to get membership in those organizations by meeting the standards, then OPR will accept reports from those organizations.
Questions for our witness? Anyone else is prepared to testify? What's the committee's pleasure? Senator Bray.
I'd just like to double check before making a motion. You are going to send a list to the committee of professions being credentialed by these outside organizations. Is that correct?
Senator Bray, report that you were sent late last night and Charlene printed it out and it's in your packets.
My mistake, so thank you. I was going to move that we approve Rule 21P14.
Senator Bray has a move that we approve Rule 21P14. The Office of Professional Regulation, which outsources certification of professional credentials. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, committee.
Charlene, is there any further business before us? One more rule. Turn the page. Wow, of course. Newport. Okay. 21P24, Agency of Natural Resources, Vermont use of public waters. Oliver Pearson, Lakes Ponds Program Manager, Department of Environmental Conservation. Hannah Smith, Associate General Counsel, Agency of Natural Resources. I believe we're going to hear that the authority granted to the town of municipality of Newport to regulate its waters has recently expired, to the surprise of me, and we're going to hear about its being restored, if that's correct. Oliver Pearson, who's going to speak on behalf of the agency?
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Hannah Smith, I'll be speaking on behalf of the agency. And the proposed rule is a relatively minor amendment to Vermont's use of public waters rules. As you explained, it's an extension of their delegation under Appendix D of the rules. Under 10 VSA 1424, the agency may delegate authority to manage public waters to municipalities that are adjacent to those waters. In the city of Newport, since 2000, the city has regulated the mooring of vessels in the public waters within the city's boundaries. So this includes Lake Memphremagog and then parts of the Black River and Clyde River. Their delegated authority is outlined in Appendix D of the use of public waters rules, and it's implemented through a duly adopted ordinance that the city reviews on a regular basis. And per Rule 16 of Appendix D, the delegation did expire on January 1st of 2021. In May, the city filed a petition with the agency to extend the delegation until December 31st of 2031. The agency granted the petition and recommends to the committee that the rule be updated to extend Newport's delegation until 2031.
Questions for the witness? So essentially, this is to reinstate the authority that has existed for the last decade for the next decade with no changes other than the dates?
That's correct. No changes.
Okay. What's your pleasure? Senator Bray.
Thank you. So I have not a question particularly related to the Memphremagog provisions today, but the Great Hosmer Pond is listed in the filing, and it says use of personal watercraft is prohibited. So can you just tell me what personal watercraft includes? Does that include rowboats? This has come up in the past. I thought I'd like to find out how that is settled.
Personal watercraft in the context of this rule refers to jet skis. I believe it's defined in the rule as well.
Yeah, this is a narrowly defined term. So as we've looked at different types of watercraft on our public waters, this personal watercraft term in the current version of the rules is really limited to jet skis, as Hannah said. There are other small motorized watercraft on our public waters. Jet kayaks come to mind as an example that do not meet the definition of a personal watercraft in the current version of the use of public waters rule.
Thank you.
Maybe I could just add that, this rule is this rule before the committee is, as Hannah said, consistent with the use of public waters rule. It was the only active mooring management area that's been delegated to a municipality in the state. The city of Newport's performance in terms of managing this active mooring management area during the previous period of validity complied with the requirements in the rule. And I think this helps reduce conflicts over public waters in this actively used part of Lake Memphremagog and the tributaries. And we'd like to see more municipalities step up and take this role on should they ever choose to. So this type of delegation is very much consistent with the use of public water rules and reduces conflict, and then it generates small but important revenue for the city of Newport as well. So it's a win-win for the agency and for the city and for users of Lake Memphremagog. Thank you.
It was hard for me to hear all that, but it sounded as if there are people like more. Did you say that you are happy to have the delegation of this authority generally because it reduces conflict and produces small amounts of revenue for the towns that are regulating?
That's correct. Sorry. Yeah, that's the gist of what I said. I can go into more detail, but I think you got it.
I just was having some trouble hearing you. So, okay, thank you.
Senator Bray.
Just a quick question on that. So it was a bit of I don't know how often this happens. Maybe you can just help the committee understand. You're delegated the authority, but you're redelegating that authority to a local municipality. Is that relatively unusual, or is this kind of a routine thing that the delegation flows down to someone else?
So when the delegation expired, mooring management is not something that the agency otherwise actively manages. So it's one of those roles that has been the authority to delegate to municipalities was passed down from when Water Resources Board managed these rules. And so this is actually the only mooring management delegation that is in the rules currently. This is the only municipality that does it. So it's a fairly unusual procedural, having to re-up this delegation doesn't happen often, only because Newport's the only one that's currently granted authority for mooring. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Senator.
I think it was, so thank you. Yeah, on the level of, a moorings delegation is one thing. I was just trying to understand A&R's relationship more generally in terms of sort of delegating authority to a more local entity. And that may be beyond the scope of the rule. So I also see that Mr. O'Grady has appeared on the screen.
Yeah, I could just, Senator, I could just say that the town of Colchester previously had a mooring management area delegated to them that expired, and Colchester did not choose to reinstate that delegation. So this is the only one active. If the committee approves this proposed rule, there are other spots in some of our public waters where delegated active mooring management could be a good idea, and that's something we'll explore with these municipalities. But as Hannah said, we don't necessarily amend the use of public waters rules for this type of delegation frequently. Historically, there's been more frequent, I would say, action on the use of public water rules on of lake and pond specific rules, as you see in Appendix C of the use of public waters rule.
Mr. O'Grady.
I just want to clarify Newport is not the only town in the state that has mooring authority. It's the only town that has authority under the state use of waters rule. The Coast Guard has designated special anchorage areas on Lake Champlain and has designated to those municipalities where those anchorages are, the ability to regulate and monitor those anchorage areas. I'm looking at the designation of the Shelburne Bay anchorage area from 1960. The date, I guess, is unimportant, but it designates the harbor master appointed by the town of Shelburne as the one that is going to basically administer the mooring area in Shelburne Bay. So Newport's the only one designated under the state use of public waters rule. There are others that do manage them on Lake Champlain.
Thank you. Questions for the witnesses? Committee, what's your pleasure? Do you have a question?
Sure, I do. So is there ever, have you noticed, or is there a history of conflict between what one designated person or entity might decide versus another? Has that come up?
Not in the context of Newport's mooring management. It's in the 21 years that it's been in effect, there have never been complaints from the public to either the state or the municipality. I think that it sounds like, based on the petition and the record of review conducted by the Water Resources Board, they renewed the delegation in 2011. The management has been done in a way that allows for all public uses to continue, and there have not been conflicts between either public users of the water, the state, or Newport.
Thank you.
Senator Bray.
So thanks for the extra information. And I think part of my line of questioning was just related to the heightened sensitivity the Senate Natural Resources and Energy and others came to have last spring over the proposed use of public waters for sinking a ferry up in Lake Champlain. So just trying to understand the regulatory landscape more clearly. With that, I'd like to move approval of Rule 21P24.
Senator Bray has moved approval of the rule. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Charlene, I will take another leap. Is there anything else any further business before us? Thank you. And Council, anything that we need to be thinking about as before we adjourn?
I would just think about the fact that you also have a busy agenda for November 18th, but that's the rules are emergency rules. And
Okay. Is there a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Senator Bongartz, Representative Bongartz moved that we adjourn. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Hi.
All opposed say nay, and adjourn.